Thanks for indulging me with that.
I feel like we are entering a new post-commercial break 90s sitcom.
That was a fun video made with my friend Graham Ord about 5 or 6 years ago, I think now. It's been fun. So you've got limited time, but something that a couple people have told me consistently, and I'm bucking against it because I feel like it formalizes this and kind of makes it awkward. But I'm gonna have to try it this time anyways because we're all still experimenting here.
Make it awkward.
Yeah. So the awkward thing is people don't know who I'm talking to. And then I never really intro them either. So I know that I have like a little brief description thing, and I'm kind of relying on people to read those. But let's assume that they didn't. Jordan, who are you?
I'm your older brother.
Yes, yes, you are. What else are you?
So Jordan Peacock. I've lived a number of places, but I'm currently based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I live here with my wife and kids. I have a couple businesses. One's an enterprise software company startup, and then I have some game design stuff that I do on the side. I'm involved with my local community. We have a neighborhood association that I'm on the board of, and we're getting ready for our annual meeting for that. It's also eventful because we have the Derek Chauvin trial going on here. And then, yeah, I keep sane by playing like board and card games and RPGs and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah, I know I titled it gaming or games because I didn't really know how to summarize it all, but I know games have been like a significant part of your spare time, what little of that there is, but somehow you find it, and you've been quite involved with that.
It's helped. It's been the ballast during COVID, I think.
That's fair. I actually didn't know, or I still don't know, when you joined the what did you call it? The neighborhood board?
Yeah, neighborhood association. Yeah. So Minneapolis. I don't know how common this is across the U.S., but Minneapolis has a pretty robust like neighborhood organization. So this is not like a homeowners association or a private thing. It's a public thing. Everybody within the geographic definition of the neighborhood has a voice. It's a voted on board. Like we're having our annual elections in April, and the exact remit of each neighborhood organization varies a bit, but they've been a formal part of the city, and they're kind of like the next level down below like your ward level organization. So like in the past year, we've done a bunch of neighborhood coordination. There's been a food program for helping people that are food insecure. There's been a lot of other kind of collaborative stuff as people are responding to all of the wrinkles that COVID and this past year has given us. But.
Okay. So like what kind of clout do they have? Like in terms of like getting things done? Is it like it's just you can kind of pull like a large pool of people together in like a self-initiated kind of form to go and do something, or do they actually have like legal power?
I mean, they're legal entities, so it's a nonprofit organization. I don't remember exactly all the coding and stuff like that, but it's a formal organization that can navigate those boundaries. It carries a fair bit of weight with regards to if things that the board president or that the board will relay up to their city council members. That obviously carries a bit more weight than just like random average citizen. But also, we've hosted forums for like most recently, there's an upcoming city council election. Our current city council member will be stepping down. And so there's, I think, 6 candidates for the replacement. And so we hosted a forum, a candidate forum where they could, they were, posed questions, and there's community questions and things like that. So being able to kind of provide that kind of platform, but in terms of formal power, it's almost nothing. It's really all in what people are willing to step up and do.
Okay, well, that's actually pretty cool. Like knowing that there is like a dedicated channel that I suppose the city or governing bodies they're kind of accustomed to hearing from, as almost like it almost sounds like you've systemized making like petitions, and they're kind of expecting to hear them from this group. Like it's basically just a bunch of people saying, "Hey, we want this. We all agreed on it."
Yeah, I mean, and there's definitely more and less successful ways to run them. And I'd say that, the city over the years and different neighborhoods and different times have explored the full like success and failure states. But especially just given the crises of the last year, the neighborhood associations have been kind of frontline responders to a lot of issues, or raising flags and being like, hey, at the city level or at the state level, you guys need to get on this because this is what we're seeing on the ground. And this is what we're trying to respond to, but we don't have, the staff or the budgets or whatever to necessarily respond adequately. Like we did last year we did a small grant program, and we got, I don't know, like 14 times the number of requests that we could service. And these weren't like frivolous requests. Like these were dire situations that would desperately help people who needed them, who oftentimes they were situations like well outside of their control. And it's just like, well, we can help this subset of them, and we can raise the flag and be like, hey, this is what the need is. So seeing the city council respond with, raising questions around rent, raising questions around, COVID response and other things like that has been part of that feedback loop.
Okay. You gave a couple of little examples. I was about to ask you for some, like for like some of the requests, like for the grant program, but you also mentioned stuff like people on the ground kind of like sending it up the chain of like, hey, this is what we're observing on the ground. You guys need to get on this before it becomes a bigger problem. If I'm not incorrect, was the George Floyd incident nearby to you? Like, is that an example of like something that kind of went a bit more global in terms of recognition? But there's like many more things, probably similar in terms of seriousness, that you witness on a regular basis and like send up the chain. Like, what other kind of things could be happening?
Yeah, so the George Floyd murder happened two or three neighborhoods southeast of us. So not far, but also not like immediately present. I actually was elected, I think, the week prior. So it was a bit of a trial by fire with that. And in terms of emergency response, I mean, different communities, particularly like in that initial 2-week period or so, there was a lot of neighborhood coordination of just health and safety, and a lot of our focus was around dealing with disinformation and dealing with information noise. So like if you were hearing gunshots and things, several blocks away, and you're like, I have no idea what the fuck is going on, and I'm scared and whatever, knowing that, and I ended up working with some people to set up a bit of a Discord to coordinate some of that stuff initially. And it's kind of laid fallow recently, but early on, just being able to be like, oh, this person's keeping an eye on my block overnight to just make sure that, anything crazy goes on, like we'll get a heads up, and there's other people that are vetting information so that the wild rumors aren't just exploding all over the place, because there's a lot of that too. And so I think those combined efforts helped just bring a certain degree of peace amongst a very trying situation. And then, I mean, it's still going on right now in the sense of we have the trial going on, and I'm tense. I mean, watching it, it's so egregiously wrong. Like it feels like the kind of thing that couldn't be made up, because you have like a nurse and an off-duty firefighter and an MMA fighter that were all present on the scene being like, what the fuck? And they're all, been doing testimonies the last 3 days. And so I'm fairly confident that a guilty verdict will get landed on, but at this point, like I don't feel like I can really trust anything to happen for sure. And whatever they do is going to be insufficient, because there's just structural issues that need to be addressed that can't be addressed through a trial like this. But it's amazing to me how many people are resistant to those. And I don't need to derail this whole conversation, but I have opinions.
No, it's fair that you don't want to go too far into it, but like honestly, I don't know what you're referencing, because they're like here in the last like 5 days, like we're not a big area at all, but I think there were 8 murders on one night on the weekend, a shooting outside of a gym right on like the main strip, and like several a car burning, a couple other murders, some attacks. Like I don't even know what's going on outside of my own city. There's so much noise going on. So pardon me, I'm not familiar with the case you're referring to right now. Can you
Oh,
fill me in?
Derek Chauvin was the cop who kneeled on George Floyd's neck.
Oh, okay.
His trial is happening, has been being broadcast live for the last couple weeks. So
Gotcha. I just
that's
wasn't
like
familiar with the name.
live right now while we're doing this. Sorry, yeah, I assumed a bit of familiarity there, but I think one of the things that it's really telling is seeing people misunderstanding cause and effect. Right? There's a lot of rhetoric around. There's a spike of carjackings, for example, last summer, and you get people pontificating about like, well, this is what happens when you defund the police. Well, nothing had happened yet, so it's like, no, what you're looking at is a fully funded police department, and probably overfunded, depending on what you're trying to talk about. And the other thing is like you look at crime rates, and it's like crime rates are up across the board. I mean, the mishandling of COVID has had a huge amount of knock-on effects, and one of them has been rise of crime pretty much everywhere. That sucks, but that's not distinctive to us, and then the other thing, when people start getting into reform issues, is things that happen at a municipal level, like police departments, vary wildly. So the solution is going to be appropriate for Minneapolis may not be directly transferable to another state or another city, because the laws might be different, the charters might be different, the organizational structures might be different, the accountability structures might be different. And so knowing what the local levers are and understanding where are the failures here and what levers can I pull here is way more important. Like the broad symptoms are very, very similar, but the routes to effective change vary. And so you need to kind of get acquainted with, well, what are the idiosyncrasies of the situation that I'm in locally?
That's fair. It sounds like a lot to deal with, but it's probably not as much like to kind of wrap your head around when you live in it. That being said, you are quite busy, as you kind of described. You have quite a few things going on. What kind of time commitment are you putting into? Like, is this like a daily thing? Do you check in every day with some kind of like thread, or what does it look like to be involved in this this elected body?
I'm so underwater on so many fronts right now that I've kept my time commitment to a few hours a week, basically right now. I'm currently secretary, so most of my key responsibilities really are just minute taking during the actual meetings that I'm a part of. The board meetings and the executive committee meetings, and then I have some follow up stuff, and I'm working on a couple side projects, but those are deliberately don't have deadlines attached, and they're, when I have the time, I can put more time in them, and when I find people that are willing to help out, try to stand them up. But right now, the main focus is really just getting to the annual meeting, the board elections this coming month, and then we'll see. We'll see what the summer brings.
Gotcha. People who elect you afterwards, what do they hear about? Like, what do they know? Is there like a feed, for lack of a better question, like a Twitter feed or something? Like, here's what the body talked about today, or like, here's where you can find the minutes.
Yeah.
Like, how do other people kind of keep you accountable and satisfy their own curiosity of like, okay, we have this body that is supposed to accomplish this. How do we check in?
Yeah. The board meetings are open to the public. Most of the subcommittee meetings are all, like, I think at most you have to just like let somebody know, or find, read RSVP basically to find out like where and when they're meeting. But all of that stuff is open to the public. The minutes of past meetings can be available. We have updates on our website. We have a weekly e-newsletter, and then once a year there's a print, kind of a big print mailing of kind of the year in review of sorts.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, that's a lot going on. So I totally get how you have to have something like gaming to kind of help you stay sane with all that going on.
Yeah, yeah, it's a nice, uh, not so much a distraction, just it's exercising a different part of the brain. It's a little less emotionally charged.
You, I don't know what games you're into right now. Like you were developing a few, you were hosting a few. Didn't you get on like as some kind of um, like what was it like was it dungeon master or what was it that like you
Yeah,
were approved to
so
be on this list of something? I'm so
well,
butchering
so
that.
yesterday, so here's a good lead in. I'll give you a couple of different examples. Yesterday, the Kickstarter for Cole Worley's John Company version 2 launched, and I jumped on that immediately because I'm a complete nerd. John Company is basically a board game about the British East India Company and how like so much of imperialism during that period was about like jockeying for positions back in London and getting pretty hats and things like that. Um, Cole was his background is in history, and he previously did Pax Pamir, which he did a version 2 of recently, which is the Great Game in Afghanistan. And it's such a killer game, both from theme and execution and everything like that. Most games you're depicting maybe a team. Like a lot of people like historical war games where it's like, oh, we're going to be uh, allies versus Axis powers for World War II. I'm much more interested in the messiness of political conflict. And so my World War II game that I like is Churchill, which is a 3-player game. One player is Churchill, one player is Stalin, and one player is FDR. And it's the 10 peace conferences that happened between the Allies. So you basically have 2 maps. One is a conference table, and then one is like a world map. And your focus is on trying to negotiate the peace. And it's like, oh no, by the way, like these things are happening in the war space. All right. And then like negotiating this unstable alliance, right? Where you actually lose the game if you win too many concessions from your opponents, because it effectively destabilizes the alliance to the point where it falls apart.
That is such a different game than I've ever seen in any shop anywhere. Where does this take place?
So that was so GMT Games was one of those where GMT had this P500 program, has still, because they have such a huge back catalog and they can't keep all the games in print. So they basically just like register people's interest, and then when they get enough people, originally it was 500, I think now it's like maybe 750. Then they'll do a new print run of the game and usually like update the rules or update with any errata at that time. So I think I waited 2 years to get enough people on the wait list for Churchill to get republished.
Oh, wow.
And then it came through. And John Company's kind of the same deal, where it's, weird niche game that you can kickstart that shit now. And up front that I have enough orders to break even. And so you don't even start until you know that you can get off the ground, which is just great for creative works, especially creative works with niche audiences, because there's no way that this is ever going to be the kind of game that you buy at like a Target or a Walmart. It's
Totally.
just
Yeah,
not.
this is so different. Like you definitely need to know your audience before. Like no one's gonna take a risk selling that kind of a game without knowing that people are gonna buy it. But this is reversing the equation, just like you described. Where like it doesn't even get off the ground until you know that it can. You've already got all the backers. You got the waiting list.
Yeah. Well, and I love that long tail of weird niche stuff, like in all forms of media. My taste in music, my taste in books, taste in games, and so then the other side. So that's on the board game space, but I really love role playing games as well. And another example of just like a weird, great niche game is I finished a game of Good Society last night, which is a role playing game for people who just can't get enough Jane Austen and want to do their own like Jane Austen inspired role playing game. And so ours was like just this hilarious drama where this one guy's aunt was forcing him to marry this person that he didn't really want to marry, but it was like his ability to get his inheritance was contingent on him him marrying before a certain time, and he'd spurned my character, who was really pissed because she had gone to France and comes back, and he's engaged to this other woman. And then their engagement falls apart at the last minute, and he comes to my character like, hey, I've got a deadline. I need to get married by like date X. Will you join me? And she was so pissed at him that it's just like, well, I'll marry you, but I'm going to go chill on continent for a bit, and you're just going to give me an allowance, and then we'll see. And that's kind of how the game ended. Was she was sending him letters from Leon, and it's like, hey, it's really great here. I might come by India and visit you at some point.
This is definitely a kind of game style that fits like certain kinds of like reading habits, or sci-fi or fiction or whatever. And there's probably quite a lot more people than anyone who's not in that world would think is into that. Like I imagine it's quite a wide variety of people that are into this.
Well, I mean, the 800-pound gorilla in the hobby is Dungeons and Dragons, which their 5th edition has just been explosive in popularity, especially with there's been kind of streamed games like Critical Role that have introduced a lot of people, and I think also kind of lowered the bar where people realize it's like, oh, you're just making shit up with your friends. It doesn't have to be super complicated. But then once you get past well, this is interesting, but I don't like all the math, and I don't like playing elves. What else is there? Like, there's a long tail of games doing all kinds of interesting things in all kinds of genres. So like the Jane Austen one's like one really interesting example of that. But like the long running games, I've been running a surrealist magic game called Invisible Sun for a couple of years now. And then I'm about to start a game of 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, in which all your characters are vampires. So
are these like local people that you're playing with? Or are they from like who's the furthest person away that you've had on a game? And are they different every time, or is it like the same kind of crew for like for some of these you were just describing?
It's a mix. My Invisible Sun game started off in person before COVID, so all of my players for that are local. And in theory, someday we will we will resume in-person games, but for now, it's all been Zoom for the last year. For the other games, though, like especially when you start getting into like the weirder niches, it's really what's a good fit for a person, and the fact that so much is online now, and that you can really reasonably run things through Discord or through platforms like Roll20, where you can have like built-in dice rolling and character sheets and stuff like that, and maps. Depending on the game, I'll use a different mix of technology, but that has allowed me to make connections with people who are in the right headspace and who want to tell the same type of story. And I just don't have to care. Like, I have to care if the time zones work out. So our vampire game is happening at 9 a.m. on a Saturday because that's what works for everybody. And also the vampires aren't awake then. So we can talk about them safely.
I love that's one of the reasonings. Yeah, the integration of like technology like Roll20 and Discord and other things like that. I imagine that kind of was initially a barrier for a lot of people. Like, oh, I can't figure this stuff out. Like, I've only recently become aware of what Discord is, and even then, like only a bare fraction of what it is. Do you find that there's more and more people just kind of learning it because they really want to play, or is it kind of like limited to the people who are a bit more familiar with this kind of interaction?
Discord has blown way up with COVID because, I mean, I think everybody and their dog at this point is on or has at least a Discord. My wife has, I think, one of her orchestra committees is using it for something. So a lot of people have just, gotten involved with tools that they never would have dreamed that they would have gotten involved in. Or, Discord used to be a bit of a niche, like gamer space, but it's really excellent at doing a stand-up community thing. And it's a little less Slack is the other really big contender. I won't even talk about Teams. Slack is great for like integrations with other proprietary products, So it's much more of a good fit if you're like a business. So I use Slack for my company, but Discord is great for like personal and community things, especially because it can be really ad hoc. There aren't like weird per user licensing issues. It has a really robust ability to do custom bots and to do custom permissions handling and stuff like that. So like I have my game company Sortilege, I just have a Discord server for that. But within that, I have a whole bunch of different permission roles. And so depending on what spaces people have access to, I just give them appropriate roles. And then they effectively have a completely different experience on my server, depending on what spaces that they're interacting with.
Yeah, that's wild. I watched a couple of little like tutorials of like how some of the potentials of what you can do, and like of course like the sky's the limit in terms of like how you're going to use these different tools. But just the fact that the tools existed for free blew my mind to what extent they all did on like one program, and it is quite integratable with other things as well. Like I've heard of people like mixing it with like if they're gaming on like a more traditional console, but then they're streaming through Twitch, they'll use Discord as a community to kind of integrate all that stuff together. And like to me, that's so cool. That's like the equivalent of hanging out with your friends and turning on like the Nintendo like 20 years ago, and then just hanging out and going and eating or going to each other's houses, doing all nighters, whatever, talking about it, dreaming up new ways to make it more or less difficult or complicated, and now that's all online, but it's way more inclusive, and the networks are huge. Like I saw in the video that I watched, there was like a screen grab at one point of like the World of Warcraft Discord channel, which I think was like more than a year old at this point, and it was just under 100,000, which I think is far exceeded by now.
Yeah, well, and the thing for me is it's effectively replaced the coffee shop bar vibe, because being able to have passive audio channels that people can just kind of drop in and out of is great. I will, sometimes when I'm working, if I'm not working on something that's super brain intensive, I'll just hang out in the voice channel for one of the servers that I'm a part of, and other people might join or not. Like, sometimes there's people that are just like, they're streaming a video game that they're playing, or like, a piece of art that they're making or something else. And so I found little, mini communities online of people who you just get to know your company. Like, and sometimes the server is about one thing, but you end up with a cluster of friends and acquaintances that may or may not be related to the server's ostensible purpose. You just end up, finding your people wherever you find them.
It's kind of surprising who else are your people. Like that's been a really cool thing about this. Like we're all kind of been forced to get outside, or me personally anyways, I've been forced to get outside of just who I see in person and talk way more with people online. Like, so I've had a couple of projects where I've involved people. I found out like after weeks of interaction what country they were in or what time zone they were in.
Yep. Twitter is the other one, but the problem for me is that like I have almost no interest in writing on social media. Like writing that I do tends to be project centered, and honestly, nobody needs my take on anything ever. So the idea of just like going on to various social media to pontificate or get into arguments or whatever just feels like a waste of time for me. So the voice chat hangout thing is really my vibe, but I really love reading Twitter because the people I follow are incredibly smart from a wide variety of walks of life. And I just don't really feel the need to add much. I'll retweet and like I'll tweet occasionally, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, I've recently rejoined Twitter again. I ditched it for years, and it was referenced enough times by people that I'm actually interested in hearing from. Like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll give it a go. But for the most part, it is one-way communication. I'm not saying much.
Yeah. Well, and it's all about just finding good curation is key. Like, so the one time that I was super active on social media was circa like 2012, I think, when whenever Google Plus like just got started, was around the same time I was doing my undergrad, right before grad school. And so I was reading just obscene numbers of books every week. And I was typing out notes and I was doing these summaries and I was just reading tons of articles. And so I just spammed my account with like here's 3,000 words on this, and here's 2 pages of excerpts from this book, and here's a whole bunch of stuff on this. And that I was doing that because it was other platforms like Facebook at the time had word limits, where you could basically do like a huge essay on Google Plus, and the search was fantastic, and they had like a really nice organization structure. So I'm like, I don't care if nobody else reads these. This is super useful for me as like an internal note-taking thing, and if anybody else happens to read it, great. But nobody else was posting stuff like that really at the time. Like everybody else was doing like little tweet size things or lots of like inspirational photographs and just other, that was the stuff that they were vibing with. And so I ended up with a lot of followers of people who were like, oh, hey, I want to engage in like heavy discourse about like weird niche scientific or philosophical topic, or stuff on foreign policy or whatever. And then they also started doing, people would share circles of like, hey, you should follow these 500 people. And I ended up on a bunch of those lists. So I ended up with like, I don't know, 5,000 followers or something crazy like that. And didn't engage with most of them, but I ended up meeting some super, super cool people that I keep in touch with today, where we all ended up just kind of, the algorithm filtered it the right way, and we stumbled across each other, and like literally those relationships have changed my life. I've had opportunities, I've had experiences that I just never would have had without having met those people. And I never would have met those people had I not decided to do that weird niche, shit posting on Google Plus back in the day. So, I really appreciate the efficacy of social media, but there's also just like, it can be really, really costly, and it can be really, really toxic if you aren't careful with it either. And so a lot of it comes down to like, well, know what you want to get out of this experience, and don't put into it what you're not willing to.
Yeah, it's funny that you say know what you want to get out of it, because like it sounds like you kind of used it like a notepad, like a public notepad, without really much of a clear idea of what you wanted to get out of it, aside from you wanted to easily search your previous.
Oh, what I wanted to get out of it
thoughts.
Was use it as a private notepad that other people could happen to read, and the other stuff was incidental bonuses.
It's fun to leave a little bit of room for some unexpected to come in there, because I agree that there's definitely times where it's healthier to limit your interaction, and other times where it's nice to kind of leave it open and just kind of see what happens with it. And like you said, there's some pretty happy surprises that can come along the way. That's pretty cool. It's funny, I also haven't heard the word Google Plus for a long time.
It fails as so many Google things fail, where it was technologically superior on pretty much every front, and it was utterly like mismanaged to hell.
Yeah.
I mean, so the biggest things, like one of my biggest beefs with social media for so long was like, hey, this person like routinely talks and posts about like these 6 things. I care about one of those things, and I never want to see the other 5. There was no solution anywhere on any of that. Google Plus had a structure for that. They had a structure for not just organizing people into groups, but being able to share the groups that you'd organize them into, which Twitter has lists, and it was most closely to that. There's a bunch of different features that were arranged in a way that was like, yes, this all fits together in the way that you want, but like I don't think they ever succeeded in publishing an open API. There's a bunch of shit that just it died of self-inflicted wounds.
Yeah, it's funny. There's I know of quite a few people who are probably of a certain demographic, honestly, not limited to, but majority held by it, who really don't want to be organized. They don't want to go to Google or Facebook or Twitter to be organized. They go there because they just want a megaphone and they want to just rant about something. And so that doesn't really fit their need, but I feel like that's a lot of people. The ones who are more worthwhile following and actually have like a cohesive thought are a bit more organized, and probably, I don't know, they weed out a lot of the people that just want to scream on a megaphone.
Well, but the nice thing is like, you can scream all you want. I'm not obliged to follow you. So I mute people aggressively. In fact, I think on Facebook, my default is to, like I'm a friend, but I unfollow pretty much everybody, and then like selectively add some people. So my feed is very sparse, and I don't check it very often. because Facebook is basically my address book and not a hell of a lot more at this point.
I was about to ask, but you just answered my question of like, so why stay friends with them? But I suppose, yeah, then you maintain contact for just that one time you happen to might need it maybe in the future. But I like
Well,
that idea.
it's that, and there's a couple of Facebook groups that we have tried repeatedly to move them off of Facebook, and it has failed every time. So it's like, all right, well, I guess we're just stuck here.
That's an annoying thing about Facebook is that there's still so many people that have been on it for years and years. They probably moved over to other platforms as a majority of their interactions, but it's such a convenient, low common denominator.
Almost all of my social media interactions have gone into, some people have called it like the dark social media, not like the dark web, but in the sense of like not not like public Twitter or whatever. So it's private Slacks, it's private Discord servers, it's other kind of niche group things. And the downside with that is you lose some of that discovery and serendipity that you get on those major platforms. But on the other hand, like there's just so much toxic bullshit. And then also one of the big frustrations I had, like particularly on Facebook, I used to share things on Facebook fairly routinely, and I would just have this experience of people who were insistent on missing the point and who really wanted to talk about like whatever cultural hot button issue was the flavor of the day. And it's not that I'm opposed to talking about those things, but like not every conversation needs to be about that. And if you're explicitly saying, hey, I want to talk about this other thing, let's maybe talk about the other thing. So I just gave up on Facebook in that respect. Had those conversations elsewhere.
It's tempting though to be engaged in those hot topic conversations, so to speak, because they generate a response, and quite often people are going to social media because they want some kind of social interaction, especially now. So if whatever hot topic of the news or the week or whatever's controversial, if that generates people actually replying to you, then you kind of get baited into repeating that same topic over and over, or the same series of topics, or whatever someone else is dictating as this is important right now, because you get people talking. Even if it's negative ways, you get them talking. Because right now there's a lot of people starved for social interaction, and talking about stuff you care about doesn't always get the replies.
I don't see conversation as an intrinsic good. And so for me, more interaction doesn't mean better interaction, doesn't mean healthier interaction. And I've actually learned that there's a fragility to being open and willing to hear someone out. So like there's lots of people that I disagree with that it's not worth my time or theirs to really interact on it, because there's no changing of minds that's going to happen, and there's no willingness to actually hear each other out. There's no willingness to accept new evidence or even just acknowledge the perspective of the other. And so you go, okay, well, that it is what it is. I could beat my head against the wall on it, or I can spend my time and emotional energy better doing literally anything else. That said, it also preserves that energy so that when those moments do arrive, you have the capacity to sit down, take the time, and be like, yeah, okay, we'll talk about, my brain's kind of blanking on it, but we'll talk about issue X for a few hours and kind of get to bedrock and figure out like, why is it that we disagree, or why is it that we're coming at it from such different places, and what experiences have brought you to this, and what have my experiences been. And it can be a moment of vulnerability and change. But if you've spent all your time like trying to fix the people that are wrong on the internet, you may not have the capacity to be present for that anymore either. And so for me, I try to preserve those, keep those reserves at hand for those moments, because they come up routinely when you're looking for them and when you have that capacity for them. But it also means that, if there's people who are just being, clearly bad faith arguments, if they're giving bad faith arguments, it's just like, okay, well, I have no time for this, so mute.
Yeah, the muting ability is quite nice online. I've seen for a while here and there people always posting something about like people online versus people in person. And my favorite example of that is like a bunch of dogs on either side of this motorized gate, and they're barking and they're baring their teeth at each other, and they're just like about to rip each other's throats out. And the gate starts like slowly opening, and they follow the gate so that it's always between them until it finally like, kind of slides into the wall and it's gone. And they kind of just quiet down and just walk away. And it's like, this is people online versus people in real life. But now there's I don't know if there's like been a bit of a change recently, or maybe it's just my circles of people that I hang out with. I don't know. You might have a better thumb on the pulse for this, or finger on the pulse, with the interactions that you see with like the neighborhood community. Sorry, what was the name of it again?
So our neighborhood, it's just a neighborhood association. So
Association,
we're Lowry Hills East. So it's the Lena is our organization.
Do you see that there's a huge difference with how people interact online still versus in person? Or how much of that neighborhood association is in person?
So I mean, right now the in-person stuff's pretty limited still, but we've had to deal with toxicity. There's some online forums that now, admittedly, a number of the participants are not actually in the neighborhood. So I think that's also part of it. Is there's a lot of people who have big opinions about where we live without actually being where we live. But there's some pretty toxic people where I've had to coach other members of the board and just other organizers on here's some of the best practices for how to handle, if someone's being abusive in a comment section, or if someone is like literally threatening you, or stuff like that. And there's been behavior that's just been reprehensible, in-person stuff too. And a lot of that is, I mean, there are best practices. There are communities that have figured out how to do this, but part of it is also tricky. Like most online communities and most tools for online communities are built around affinity groups, right? It's a product, or it's a community around an idea, but these aren't public spaces and they don't have public obligations, right? So if I'm company X and you're being a dick on my forums, I can kick you off, right? You have no right to be on my forums. I may or may not have a policy, even, but ideally I have a policy, and you fail to meet that standard of behavior, and I kick you off, and it's for cause, and you have no recourse. You can try to sue me, whatever, deal with it. We're a neighborhood association that's based on a geographic group. So we want everybody who lives in this to be able to, in principle, have their voice heard on things that relate to the neighborhood. That said, like, you still can't do illegal shit. Like, you can't, threaten somebody, threaten to kill somebody, right? Like, that's not okay. And there's a lot of stuff that's basically unhelpful. And so having a published code of conduct and having moderators that are willing to enforce things and to basically be like, hey, you can stay here, but this is what you have to do in order to allow everybody a chance to be heard. Like, if you're refusing to shut up when it's past your time, or if you're screaming obscenities at somebody or whatever, like, you don't have a right to be heard in those situations if you can't comply with basic decorum in the forum where you've been invited. So it's not that you're not allowed to speak in that forum. It's just that, hey, like, here's the bar. You must at least be this high to ride the ride. And so it's really just a matter of setting that up and just setting expectations and being really clear about them, because nobody wants to be caught out by that. And that's just with everybody with COVID learning how to move things online, there's also been a lot of learning from people who are not native to some of these digital spaces. Some of their intuitions get thrown a little bit. And also, digital spaces are less personal. And so people might be willing to say much more heinous things digitally than they would, if they're sitting face to face and they know that, like, I might get punched if I actually say this to somebody. So it's a lot of a learning experience for everyone in that. But being a neighborhood association, you just have a different set of constraints than most private. Because if it's a private server, get the fuck off. Like, I have no qualms about kicking people off of servers that I own and that I control that are private, right? It's not a free speech issue.
Right. Right. Just real quick, how much time do you have? Because I don't want to keep you.
I got 10 minutes.
Okay, cool. No, I'm actually really happy to kind of unpacked a little bit of that for me. This it's not something that I give like a lot of time to thinking about. I know that somebody has to. Fortunately, I don't, and I get to learn from people who do. In case I ever am in that kind of a role. So thanks for talking about that. Something that I don't actually know what you're doing, because it's like I don't have the brain capacity to hang on to what your company does. Like, you can describe it in layman's terms, and I kind of get it at the time. Can we try again? Can you help me know what your company does? All I know is that it's not for small businesses. It's like enterprise level. There's like a certain threshold that it matters to.
Yeah, we're kind of focused on the middle market. So Becoming Machinic is the name of the software company that I co-founded with Caleb Shingeldecker. And, we do business process automation for the mid-market. So basically, if you are, let's say, like a $50 million manufacturing company that, maybe you've got like 50 employees or something like that, and you've got software systems from the last 30 years that are all trying to talk to each other, and they're not doing that great. It's livable, but it's not great. It could definitely be optimized. Some of the oldest systems you'd actually love to retire, but you can't because just there's too much stuff on there, and you don't have the money to hire externally to get things off, and you don't have the in-house expertise to migrate it. Our system can kind of come in alongside and really broker those exchanges between all those different systems, but also then between those systems and your employees. And usually we're replacing a combination of piecemeal kind of patchwork tooling. Sometimes it's homegrown tooling. Sometimes it's straight up manual labor that we're replacing. And then we're automating most or all of that. So in some cases, you'll have situations where your employees will need to add, information at certain steps of a process. But then if you can automate everything else and then just present to them, like, here's the one thing you need to do, then that really frees them up and not having to manage all the fiddly bits of the rest of the process. So we've been running this since 2014. We started. Our first client came live end of 2016, which is also when I started doing this full time. Caleb came full time end of 2019. And then right now we're growing. We have a few contractors, and we're looking to hire some salespeople. We're doing a seed round right now to raise some money, and then goal is to basically double or triple in size this year, and put ourselves in a good position for coming years. But yeah, it's a weird startup life. Has been weird, and like COVID slowed a lot of things down. So I feel like we're hitting some of the milestones that I was hoping to hit last summer. It is what it is. At least we didn't lose ground. So I'm thankful for that. But, you're covering so many weird terrain bits. You're dealing with legal and accounting and HR and sales and software development and software architecture and all of the above all the time.
Are there, how do I say it? Are there like people problems that you find are like a strange parallel between like the neighborhood association and here? Because you were describing how some people's intuitives, when they are on a more digital platform or more technologically driven communication medium, that some of their intuitives fail them. That kind of sounds like some of like the older software failing with some of the newer requirements of it that you just described that you fix.
Yeah. Have you ever seen, what is it, Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares?
I've seen a few of those. Yeah, they're pretty good. It kind of sounded like rinse and repeat for most of them. So on the watch like 2 or 3.
That was my guilty shit TV watching for a while. But I love the fact that every restaurant that he went into, very quickly it's like, okay, these are the technical failures. Okay, you need to replace your fridge. You need to replace your stove. You need to replace, you need to hire the staff in these areas. You need to fix your books, like whatever. These are what, identify the problem, solve it. Usually it's a little bit of time and money, whatever, move on. And then there's the political issues or the interpersonal issues, right? Of the manager is screaming obscenities at the staff all the time. The cook is straight up stealing, or there's failures of communication between the like the hostess to the kitchen staff or whatever. Those are much more gnarly, and that's, I think, the tricky part when you're doing enterprise consulting, enterprise sales, is that most problems have both components. And to be perfectly honest, like most people only really know and identify the technical components, and usually those aren't even well defined and are often like missing bits or are wrong or whatever. But then they like straight up disavow or like actively lie or just don't even see the political issues. So you might have a situation where it's like, well, it's obvious that you should replace system X with system Y. And that might be true, except that, this executive has said, like, we will never do that. Okay, well, that's a constraint that you need to take into account as well. And maybe you can try to, change their mind. Or maybe it's just a matter of, all right, given that, what can we do within those constraints? But at least being able to have clarity around the shape of the actual problem and the different relationships to that. And sometimes that's the value of coming in as an outsider, is you are able to see and interact in these political spaces without, you're not forced to live in them for good and ill. You're able to basically look at some of these things and go, hey, that's a really toxic work dynamic. Maybe we can fix this, or at the very least, like, bring some attention to it, and then hope. But ultimately, companies are going to do whatever they're going to do.
Right. No, that's a neat point about like being able to see it from an outsider perspective. You do see stuff with the clarity or without the callousness that someone who's just gotten used to it. Maybe like the first day they're a little bit gun shy from it, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that's happening here. And you realize everyone else is just kind of used to it, so you just kind of grit and bear it. Then you become used to it, and it is a toxic problem, and it may be systematic, but maybe it's in conjunction with a technical failure, like you were describing earlier, that may or may not even be accurately identified. So then when you bring them all together, it's like the combination is where the real killers are.
I mean, you can get kind of inured to the technical constraints too. Like, I sometimes give the analogy of, like, if you have a 4-foot doorway in your house, you're just like, oh yeah, I just have to stoop whenever I go in and out of that room. And it's so stupid, but like, if you've been there 20 years and you're just like, oh yeah, I don't even think about it. I just stoop when I go through that door. And then someone's like, like, we could just like cut it out a little bit, give you 7-foot clearance. It's fine. The biggest constraint that I work with, and this is true, like at a local government level, this is true at a business level, is lack of imagination. People who have been used to a certain kind of status quo, or they're used to solutions that look a certain way, and they can't even imagine what a different type of solution or a different kind of status quo would even look like or mean. And there's often like some anxiety tied up in there too, which means that you have to manage that anxiety. You have to basically help guide their imagination, help stimulate it with some ideas to help them take those baby steps and help them see that, well, oh, this could be otherwise. What would that even mean? And then, begin building a bridge to those solutions. And some people do that, and then they freak out and they retreat to what they know. And, that's a thing. But some people take the steps and build something new. And often that's better. Sometimes it isn't. But we try to build
give it
things
a
that are
try,
better.
though. No,
Yeah.
thanks so much for doing this. I'm aware of the time. I think you probably have to go now.
Yeah, I have a call coming up in a couple minutes, so sorry about that constraint, but it
No,
was good chatting with you.
no, I'm glad that we did this. Thank you for entertaining me, or not entertaining, indulging me and helping me to hopefully be entertaining or at least interesting to someone somewhere. I'm learning how to do this better and better, and there's probably going to be more remote of these. So I need to figure a couple of my technical problems out. And do you want to close with anything at all, or where people can find a blog or anything that you write, or should I just add that in the description?
Yeah, no, I don't write anything publicly hardly anymore, but I'm he who cuts down on Twitter, and I'm various other places.
Cool. Okay. Well, hey, thanks so much for this. I'm going to play that video one more time, but you can hang up. That's all good.
All right,
Bye,
all the
everybody.
best.